Not love. Not friendship. Something quieter, but just as powerful. They say every connection begins with a moment so ordinary, you almost miss it. For me, it started with a soft hello across a quiet room, nothing dramatic, no instant recognition, just a faint pull I couldn't explain. I had signed up for a weekend creative workshop mostly to clear my head. My life, at 26, felt directionless. Work felt mechanical, conversations surface level. I wanted something real, something that made me feel again. When she walked in, the room seemed to slow down. She wasn't trying to draw attention, she didn't need to. Confidence lived in the way she carried herself, calm, grounded, and certain. Her voice, when she introduced herself as Elena, the guest mentor, had a warmth that filled the space gently, like sunlight filtering through curtains. Throughout that first day, she spoke about emotion, how every feeling, whether joy or regret, leaves an imprint on who we become. I found myself watching her more than I intended to, studying how her expressions softened when she spoke of loss, how her laughter sounded effortless but rare. When our eyes met for the first time, it wasn't intense, it was recognizing something familiar in a stranger. A quiet understanding. She smiled, and for a reason I couldn't name, it stayed with me. During a break, I approached her to ask about a point she'd made, something about how creativity flows better when emotions are acknowledged, not suppressed. She listened with genuine interest, her attention undivided. "You already understand more than you think," she said, her gaze steady but kind. That single sentence felt like a mirror, reflecting the parts of me I'd been avoiding. The air in the room carried the faint aroma of coffee and paper, sounds of pencils scratching, low chatter, soft jazz from the speaker. Yet everything else faded when she spoke. There was nothing flirtatious, nothing intentional. Just presence, two people briefly aligned by curiosity. But later that evening, walking home under the amber streetlights, I kept thinking about her words. About how emotions, once acknowledged, start shaping every connection we form, whether we realize it or not. I didn't know then that this would be the beginning of something quietly transformative. A story not about chasing love, but discovering how emotions build invisible bridges between souls. One look, one word, one unspoken feeling at a time. The next few sessions unfolded like quiet chapters in a book I didn't know I'd started reading. Every time I entered that room, there was an invisible shift, an awareness that she was there, moving with effortless composure, greeting everyone by name, her eyes lingering just long enough to make you feel seen. Elena wasn't just teaching art or writing, she was teaching understanding, the kind that begins inside. "Your work will only be as honest as you are," she said one morning, her voice calm but piercing. I wrote those words down, though I wasn't sure why they struck me so deeply. Our conversations grew naturally. Sometimes brief exchanges over coffee, sometimes longer talks after class. She asked questions that went beyond small talk. "What emotion do you avoid the most?" Or, "When did you last feel completely present?" I'd never been asked questions like that, not by someone who actually listened to the answers. And she did listen, not the way most people do, waiting for their turn to speak, but fully. She'd tilt her head slightly, her eyes narrowing in thought, her fingers resting under her chin as if she could hear the emotion beneath my words. In those moments, I saw her not just as a mentor, but as a mirror, reflecting the parts of me I didn't usually reveal. In return, I started noticing her subtleties too. How she would touch her wrist whenever she felt uneasy. How she'd pause before sharing something personal, like she was testing whether the space could hold her truth. Her laughter carried both warmth and distance, like someone who'd learned to protect her joy carefully. We began to trade small stories. I told her about growing up feeling out of place, always chasing approval. She told me about losing someone who once made her believe emotions were a weakness. Her tone was even, but her eyes gave her away, a soft ache hidden behind composure. One evening, as the others left, we sat in near silence, surrounded by the faint hum of the building. She said softly, "Funny how people can see so much of themselves in strangers." I didn't answer, I just nodded, because I knew exactly what she meant. Somewhere between her words and my silence, the emotional blueprint between us began to take form, drawn not in lines of desire, but in shared recognition. Two souls, quietly realizing that understanding someone could feel dangerously close to being understood yourself. As the weeks went on, the air between us began to change. Nothing was said, but everything was felt. The small glances, the subtle pauses, they carried more meaning than any confession could. Elena had a way of making ordinary moments feel significant. When she leaned over to correct something in my notes, her perfume, soft and floral, brushed the air between us. When she laughed at something I said, it wasn't the polite laugh of a teacher, it was genuine, a little surprised, as if I had reached a part of her she'd forgotten existed. We began staying back after sessions, sometimes to discuss ideas, sometimes for no reason at all. The conversations drifted from art to life, from theories to memories. She told me about her first exhibition, how it failed, how that failure taught her more than success ever could. I told her how I'd been afraid to take risks, in work, in love, in everything. One evening, the sun was setting behind the large studio windows, filling the room with a golden calm. She stood beside me, both of us watching the light fade from the paper we'd been sketching on. "You think too much before you feel," she said quietly. "Sometimes, the heart knows before the mind catches up." Her words hit deeper than they should have. Maybe because she was right. Or maybe because hearing it from her made it feel safe to admit. There was a silence after that, not awkward, but alive. The kind of silence that hums with awareness. I could hear her breathing softly, see the faint curve of her lips as she looked out the window. My hand rested near hers on the table, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, but not close enough to touch. For a moment, I wondered if she felt it too, that quiet pull, that fragile connection built on trust and restraint. She didn't move away, and somehow, that said everything. Later, when I packed my things, she smiled and said, "You listen differently now." I smiled back, unsure what to say. But I knew what she meant. We had stopped talking to each other and started listening through each other. Whatever this was, friendship, admiration, something unnamed, it had begun to cross invisible lines. The emotional blueprint between us was no longer abstract, it was alive, beating softly beneath every word left unsaid. The closer we grew, the more carefully she began to speak. It wasn't distance exactly, more like caution. Her words still carried warmth, but there was a quiet restraint behind them now, as if she was reminding herself where the lines were drawn. I noticed it in small ways. The way she'd step back slightly when we laughed too easily. The way her eyes lingered, then quickly shifted to something else. She never said it, but I could feel it, the question neither of us wanted to ask: what are we becoming? One evening, a soft drizzle fell outside as the group wrapped up. She suggested coffee at the cafe nearby, something casual, something harmless. But even harmless things can hold too much meaning. We sat by the window, the city blurred by rain, steam rising from untouched cups. The conversation drifted between light and heavy. She told me how people often assumed she had everything figured out, how exhausting that assumption could be. I admitted I admired her calm, but envied it too. Then came a silence that lingered longer than it should have. Her eyes met mine, steady, searching, almost apologetic. I wanted to tell her that being near her made everything feel clearer, that she'd become the calm I had been looking for. But something in her gaze told me to stop. "Elena," I said softly, "do you ever feel like connection happens faster than it should?" She looked down, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger. "All the time," she whispered. And that's when I remind myself that not everything we feel needs to become something more. It wasn't rejection. It was honesty. It was her way of protecting both of us. Still, it left an ache behind, a quiet one, the kind that lingers when logic wins over longing. When we parted that evening, she smiled, that calm, composed smile she wore when she didn't want her emotions to show. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass, her hand lightly pressed against her chest, eyes closed, as if steadying her heartbeat. That image stayed with me. Because I realized that even restraint is a kind of connection, one born out of care, not denial. We were still drawing our emotional blueprint, but now it had sharper lines, boundaries defined not by distance, but by respect at it happened unexpectedly, the moment that shifted everything. There was an evening event at the studio, a small gathering to celebrate the workshop's closing. The room glowed with soft amber lights, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the faint scent of jasmine candles. Yet, in the middle of it all, she seemed somewhere else, quieter than usual, her smile a little too practiced. I watched her move through conversations, always gracious, always composed. But I could see it, the heaviness behind her eyes. When she finally stepped outside for air, I followed a few minutes later, not out of intent, but instinct. She stood near the railing, the night air cool against her face, her arms folded as if holding herself together. I said her name gently. She didn't turn right away, just exhaled slowly. "Sometimes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I get tired of being the strong one. People see calm and think it means I'm unbreakable." The way she said it, soft, trembling slightly, made my chest tighten. For once, the woman who always seemed in control looked human, vulnerable, real. I stepped closer, careful not to break the fragile quiet around us. "You don't have to be unbreakable," I said. "Not with everyone, and not with me." She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes glistened faintly in the dim light, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence between us said everything words couldn't. I reached out, slowly, resting my hand over hers where it gripped the railing. She didn't pull away. Her hand was cool from the night air, but it warmed against mine. The world felt still, no movement, no noise, just two people quietly holding space for each other. She turned her hand, her fingers brushing my palm before she whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust. A small, fragile surrender. We stood there for a while, side by side, saying nothing. The night carried our silence gently, the hum of distant traffic, the faint echo of laughter inside, the rhythm of shared breathing. When we finally went back in, something had changed. Not our roles, not our boundaries, but something deeper. We had crossed a quiet threshold, one built not on desire, but on understanding. And though nothing was spoken aloud, I knew, from that moment on, she wasn't just someone I admired. She had become part of my emotional blueprint, a feeling that would never quite fade. After that night, something unspoken changed between us. She didn't withdraw completely, but her presence became softer, more deliberate. The easy rhythm we'd found, the spontaneous talks, the lingering silences, now carried a quiet restraint, as if both of us were afraid of stepping too close to what we'd almost revealed. She still smiled when she saw me, still asked how I was, but her questions stayed on the surface now. I could sense her walls rising again, not out of disinterest, but self-preservation. Maybe she realized what that moment under the night sky had meant. Maybe she felt it too, and that's exactly why she had to pull away. I respected her distance, though it wasn't easy. The studio felt different without her laughter filling the spaces between words. I tried to focus on my work, but everything I created seemed to echo with her influence, her voice guiding, her warmth lingering like sunlight long after the day ends. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her from across the room, speaking with others, graceful as ever. Our eyes would meet briefly, a small acknowledgement, quiet and distant, then drift apart again. It hurt, but it also humbled me. Some connections aren't meant to burn, they're meant to glow. Weeks passed. I started writing more, journaling, sketching ideas that had been trapped inside me for months. Without realizing it, I was tracing her impact through my words. She had taught me to feel before thinking, and now I was learning to live that lesson alone. One afternoon, near the end of the final session, she approached me. Her tone was lighter, but her eyes still held that familiar calm. "You've grown," she said. "Not as a student, as a person." I smiled, though part of me wanted to ask if she missed what we shared. But I didn't. Some things are better left untouched, not out of fear, but respect. As the sun set through the glass windows, she placed her hand briefly on my arm. "Never lose the way you feel things," she said softly. That's your strength. In that simple gesture, that brief, gentle touch, every distance, every silence, every restraint found meaning. Walking home later, I realized she hadn't left me at all. Her presence had become quieter, yes, but also deeper, a part of me now, woven into my emotional blueprint. Some bonds don't fade with space. They deepen through it. The final day arrived quietly, the way endings often do. The workshop was over, the room half empty, filled with scattered brushes, empty cups, and the soft echoes of laughter that had once filled it. I lingered longer than I should have, packing slowly, unsure if I was waiting for something or someone. Elena appeared near the doorway, holding her notebook close to her chest. Her expression was calm, serene, but her eyes carried a trace of the same unspoken weight I felt. "You stayed behind," she said with a faint smile. "I guess I'm not good at goodbyes," I replied. She walked closer, her steps measured, graceful as always. There was no tension now, only a quiet understanding that whatever we had shared, it had already done its work. It had changed us. For a moment, we stood in silence, surrounded by the fading light of late afternoon. Dust particles shimmered in the air, moving gently like suspended time. "You know," she said softly, "connections like this don't happen often. They remind us what it means to really see someone, not for what they give us, but for what they awaken in us." Her words sank deep. I wanted to tell her how much she'd done exactly that, how her presence had rewired something in me, made me gentler, more aware, more alive. But I didn't. I simply nodded, because she already knew. When she stepped closer to hand me her notebook, a small gesture of parting, our fingers brushed. That single touch carried the full story, every silence, every glance, every unspoken emotion that had lived between us. She said, "Keep writing. Don't let the world make you numb again." I smiled. "I won't." Then came the moment I had both feared and longed for. She reached forward and pulled me into a soft hug. It wasn't long, but it was real, the kind of embrace that says thank you and goodbye at the same time. Her perfume lingered as she stepped back, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. As she left, I didn't feel loss, I felt completion. Some people enter our lives not to stay, but to help us meet the parts of ourselves we were too afraid to face. Walking out into the evening light, I realized that the blueprint she helped me build wasn't about love or longing, it was about feeling fully, deeply, and without fear. Every connection shapes us. Some by holding on. And some by letting go, beautifully.